I think I'm wired up. Am I on? Okay. Hi, everybody. This is really a wonderful evening. You know, it's been 20 years since we started hearing about the Pleiadian case pretty much here in America. It was in January 1975 when Billy got that first cooling sensation and the phone rang 10 times, and he hopped on his moped and headed out for that first sighting out there, and the pictures started coming out. So, and then, of course, because of Wendell and Lee Elders and Tom Welch and Jim Delatosa and all the other wonderful people in the early days that were gathering all the information, a few years after that, it started filtering over here into America. I think I first heard about it 78, 79, somewhere back in there when Wendell was leading the CIA all over Europe, and the pictures were starting to come back a little bit. And I saw these pictures, and I thought to myself, my God, if there are really human intelligences coming from another world that are human, that are that advanced, imagine what we could learn from them. Well, I had an import company at the time. I was kind of running back and forth to Europe anyway, going to Italy, and I kept trying to find some way to get over and find out more about this, but it didn't work out. I even tried once. I was in Italy and Rome, and I called over to the house over there, and actually I called Lee Elders first. I says, Lee, is this a good time to go over to the farm? I'm in Rome right now. I could run right over there. And he says, no, don't go right now. There's been another attempt on Billy's life. And I says, you're kidding. He says, no, some woman thought he was the Antichrist or something and took a shot at him. I says, took a shot at him because they thought he was the Antichrist? He says, yeah, it's really a damnest story you ever heard. The Pleiadians warned him about it. And Billy, he's got so much energy. He's a character, all right. He put a metal plate in his coat pocket and went into the ship and had the Pleiadians explain to him that this woman was going to walk right up and take a shot at you right in the chest. He says, well, where's it going to happen? He says, well, right here. She's going to shoot you right in the chest. Billy put a metal plate in his coat and walked right out where he was supposed to stand and waited for her to walk up the driveway. When the woman came up, she took a shot at him, hit him right in the chest. He, of course, just stood there. The woman probably thought he was the Antichrist then. Took off running down the road. Billy hops in his car and starts chasing the lady down the road, and to make a long story short, he catches up with her and has a nice conversation with her. They become friends, and she winds up joining the group. So, you know, the nice thing about Billy is, and there's a lot of things said about him, and I had a really good time being over there myself for the short time that I could stay there. He's a little kind of like meeting Santa Claus. I think Wendell and Michael would agree with me. If he was here tonight, you like the guy right away. He'd just kind of walk up here to the microphone and, hello, everybody, hello. You know. He's just, as soon as you're around him, you just know you're around someone who spent a lifetime pursuing the spiritual side of life and wants everybody to just share and love each other. He's a really peaceful little guy. My first trip over there, I finally decided to go, and I wrote a lot of letters. And I just wanted to go find out. I was just kind of on my own path of discovery, wanting to know what's going on over here in Schmidt-Rudy. I had already been around the country. I'd worn out 3 passports. I'd been through China. I'd been to Japan. And, you know, done a lot of the things most people do. I'd been to Egypt and was scouring the north wall of the King's Chamber to see if Billy Meyer had been there or the Pleiadians had been there. They haven't. Yeah, as far as I know anyway, at least not in the King's Chamber. So I finally wound up going over to the farm. Previous to that, through the courtesy of Wendell and Lee Elders, I'd had a set of slides, and we are going to actually show you some slides tonight, so I know we said there'd be a slideshow. So we're getting a little bit off, so I'm going to talk just for a few minutes, and then we're going to give you a chair break. And then we're going to have a slideshow for any of those of you that would like to stay for. We'll do about 30, 45 minutes of all the Meyer photos, or many of them anyway. I got over to Schmidt-Rudy, and you've heard all the stories about trying to find it, and they're all true. I had my trouble finding it also, but I took the train to Winterthur and then got off and went to Vila, and, you know, I got off in the train station, and I'm standing there, and I'm thinking, okay, how do I get my way up to the farm? I've got a map of instructions that was given to me by a fellow named John Van de Ven, who had been there before that I was there. And I'm looking at the map, and a little station wagon car pulls right up in front of me. I'm just standing there looking at it, and it's Billy in the car. Someone else is driving the car, and I look down, and the lady driving the car just kind of looks over. Hello, you are Randy? I says, yeah, I'm Randy. He says, okay, take the bus in 10 minutes. We will see you at the farm. Shoots off just as I'm getting ready to say hello. You know, I'm thinking, okay, I'll have to work on fitting in this place, I guess. So bus came. I went up there. I was working at the time at a bank, and I had only 3 weeks vacation. So I got there, and as I'm coming up, out in front of the farmhouse there, what they call the Star Center, there's a visitor's patio. And on the visitor's patio, that's where they have everybody sit down, and they show you all these beautiful pictures. And there's a guest book, and I'm flipping through it, looking at all the names of all the people from many different countries all over the world that have come over there to visit. And I'm signing it, and there's this blonde-haired lady sitting over at the table over there in German, just pounding on the table and yelling things. I don't understand what she's saying. She's just and she's just going at it. And then somebody comes over and says, "Hello, you are to meet this woman. She's greeting the visitors here." And I'm going, "Oh, boy, it's going to be a good day." And so I sat down, and she turns to me and says, "Hello, my name is Bruni Zimmerman. I am greeting the visitors here today." I says, "What is it you're so upset about?" And she says, Americans. We've had great trouble." And I says, well, I'm from America. And I says, we know all about you. And so we proceeded to talk, and they were quite upset over the difficulties they were having with certain people using the materials and not getting paid for it and this and that. And I says, "Well, what seems to be the difficulty?" He says, "Well, over the years, people have come here, and they come from Hollywood, and they come from this place and that, and we give them pictures, and we give them this, and they never come back, and we never get anything about it. They just kind of come here and use it, and then they call us names, and they go home and they write articles and say we're this, and we're silly farmers and fools." And I'm thinking, yeah, I've read a lot of those. I guess that really has happened, hasn't it? She's going on for about an hour explaining, and then she kind of calms down, and she wants to know why I'm there. And I says, "Well, I just came over to learn. I'm just, want to know what's going on. I don't want anything. I don't need a contract or the rights to anything. I just want to know what's happening." So after I heard all about how bad, this guy was and that guy and this guy and so forth, she says, "Well, come to dinner with me." I said, "Okay." So we go down the hill. She lives in Vila. Most everybody at the Semyasi Silver Star Center, what they call, there's about 15 people live there. That's where Billy lives and Poppy and the kids and so forth. They have a nice big farm there, a nice home for everybody. But Bernie was the only one that lived off campus, as I called it. She lived down the hill. Bernie lives in Vila. It's about 10 miles down the mountain where the bus just brought me back up from. So I go down to Bernie's house, and I'm playing this real slow. I'm having to adjust to the fact of, this rather strong German personality that I'm not used to. I'm from Kansas, where it takes about 30 minutes just to say howdy, Things are a little slower. So I kind of, I spend the evening with Bernie, and I slowly find out that she's just really a genuine, wonderful person. She really cares about what's going on there. All of them do. But they're having lots of difficulties because they are very small town people, and they don't socially understand really how to interact with us. They're not carrying Visa cards around, and they don't buy fancy cars, and they're very close to nature. And they live a lot differently than we do. And when we come over there with our big ideas and big deals, hey, we'll put you on the silver screen, we'll do this and we'll do that, it doesn't mean much of anything to them because they're missing the point. The Pleiadians have made contact with Billy and any number of people over the past several hundred years to make us aware that we are not alone in the universe. They're trying to stimulate our consciousness so we can create the kind of future where we may actually be able to interact with them and other races. They're trying to find ways to push visions and ideas into us, to stimulate our thinking so we can pull ourselves away from the material realm and begin to lead a more spiritual life. Well, to make a long story short, I stayed there for 3 weeks, and every night I would go to Bruni's house, and Bruni was teaching me all about these things, and she would always tell me, "Now, you can't tell anybody that you were here at the house." I said, "Why?" I said, "Well, you're not in the group. We're not supposed to give this information out to just everybody, and they will be quite upset if they know that you're coming down here every evening." See, she would drop me off about 2 miles before the guest house about midnight each night, and then I'd have to walk through the forest to get back up to the guest house. So I wasn't supposed to say anything. And I thought, well, that's kind of an unusual sort of situation. As it turns out, Bruni did have a lot of difficulties because, like I say, she had her own place off campus living down in the town, and that made it a little difficult for her. 3 weeks there, Billy was there all the time, but he wouldn't speak to me. And I was told that he'd had enough of Americans and wanted no more questions, and there I showed up, and that's what I came for, an American with a lot of questions, right? So it's exactly why I came. So I thought, well, I'll just kind of stick this out. And I was staying at the little guest house right close to the farm there. And they have these little bitty rooms. If any of you ever go over there, there's 5 little rooms, A, B, C, D, and E, up there on the 2nd floor. And you walk down the stairs and use the restroom and so forth. And nobody speaks any English. You have to kind of go in the kitchen and get your own food or point at it or something like that. And I'm lying there one night just kind of thinking, I've been there about a week, thinking about all the things that has happened, and I hear somebody call my name, but it's not by anybody that I recognize. And I thought, that's kind of strange, and I got up because I thought it was somebody at the door. So I walked over to the door, and I opened it up, and I looked up and down the hall, and it kind of dawned on me, I'm the only person staying here at the guest house. Then I heard my name again, and I couldn't get any direction to it. And it dawned, that's inside of my head somehow. So there was no more sounds. Instead, there was the idea to lay down and pay attention. Okay? So I just laid down on my bed and paid attention. I started getting what I now know to be real-time visions. Ideas and dreams were starting to come in. Somebody was sending me something. And I was getting indications about the seriousness of what's going on over in Switzerland, what there is to learn, and to stick it out and to learn and to pay attention. So I did. I hung on for 2 more weeks, painted the barn, fixed the fence, fed the kitchen. I did just about everything around there, including working in the garden. And I remember one day, I'm up on the north side of the farmhouse, and I'm working up there. The altitude's so high, I'm just about to pass out anyway from working out in the heat. And Billy's sitting down on the patio in front of the house, which he usually does in the afternoon. And I'm up there working away all by myself, just, I look down and I see Billy kind of walk out in front of the house, and he's looking up at me. It's like a half mile down the hill. So I kind of stopped and waved at him down the hill like this, and he saw me, and he turned and, dashed back into the house. He was doing all he could for a couple of weeks just to kind of, try to pretend not to see me at all. We would have dinner every evening, but he wouldn't talk to me. So I thought, well, this is, something for me to learn here. I'll have to kind of get used to this. So I stayed for the 3 weeks. The day I was supposed to go, everybody come out. We were all kind of becoming friends, and I actually was learning a lot. They gave me all the notes and so forth. And I found them really to be really very nice people, very loving people, but you have to get used to the style. Their way of doing things is much different than ours, and they really have had a lot of pressure on them. They have a lot of concern about what to do with the information, who to give it to, how to handle the information, and it's a pretty difficult position to be in. Well, I left and went back home to L.A., and a couple of weeks later the phone rang, and it was Bruni. Billy likes you. It's okay to come back. I said, okay. That makes sense to me, I guess. So I did, and I went back. It was a few months before I could go back, and I did. And that time I stayed for pretty much the whole summer. I forget how long it was, something like that. And when I got back this time, it was a whole different situation. Billy was very friendly, and we hung out every day. There was hardly anybody around the center during the day. Usually just he and I, or we'd go to the mall, and I had him all to myself for at least a couple of months just to ask questions and talk about things. And to be quite honest with you, most of the things that he wanted to talk about, spiritual things and life and how the planet works and what reincarnation is and so forth, he was overwhelming me. These weren't the questions that I was quite ready for, because I soon found out that knowledge, you have to take it when you're ready for it. If you don't have a foundation for things, then they don't mean much to you. They're just facts that we kind of stick away somewhere. Billy could sense that. So instead, he started giving me all of his notes, and we'd go in the office, and he'd give me everything. Well, read this and read that and see Bruni. And I did, and I started kind of getting up to speed pretty fast. Well, I spent a lot of time there, and then one day he kind of surprised me, and he says, come on, we're going to town. And we went to town, and we went to their equivalent of, like, I guess, a courthouse or city office or something like that. And I said, what are we doing? And he says, well, I'm having some problems, and I want you to be my power of attorney. I said, power of attorney? What are we doing? He says, well, I have a lot of contract problems and things with different things going on, and I've signed too many contracts, and I don't understand hardly any of them. And I want you to help me kind of clean them up and work with Bruni. So he went in and signed over his power of attorney to me and got me a little badge and gave me a card that says, you're now a special member of the FIGU. And I says, okay. I was pretty hesitant right there, because I suddenly was finding myself getting into things that might be getting a little over my head, There's a lot of FIGU people living right there that didn't exactly appreciate this, and they're not very fond of Americans anyway. I'm just warming up to them, and now I'm getting special privileges. It didn't work out too well. I was a member for about 2 years, and I had a lot of difficulty being the only guy in America trying to get along with all the decisions being made, in Switzerland. And I went back one other time after that and spent some time there, and then I dropped out of the group. I'm not a very good follower. It wasn't my reason for going over there anyway. I just would kind of wanted to learn things. I learned a lot. He's a very special man, and I was hoping sometime in the future, if his health permitted, maybe he would feel like coming out on the trail and talking to people, because he's missing out on what could be maybe the most important part of his life. His name means keeper of the treasure, and that's what he's done very well. He's recorded a lot of wonderful information, taken a lot of wonderful things down so that we can all share it, but he doesn't know about you guys. He doesn't know how well he would be accepted and how we would care just to have him come over and talk. I tried to get him to do that once, and he was ready to do it. And he says, I can't. I'm in jail with the women here. What will I do? And he says, it's all right. You can take a boat and come on over for a tour, and let's do some talks. And he says, oh, I can't leave the farm. I can't do that. And he says, so we talked about it a lot, and he almost did. I almost had him talked into it, but it didn't work out. The Pleiadian contacts, I have a book out called The Pleiadian Mission. And in the book, there's something I do need to clear up. In the book, it states that Billy Meyer's contacts had ended in October of '78. And it isn't quite clear in there what I meant. He had a series of contacts from '75 through '78, which were specifically for the people of Earth. And when those contacts came to an end, when the Pleiadians decided to stop those contacts because it was no longer in their interest, it wasn't that Billy's contacts ended. Billy had had contacts for years before that, even when he was a child, and they're still going on. As a matter of fact, there is another group now. Wendell mentioned to you earlier that there are different groups of Pleiadians coming here and having contacts with different people. Billy's having contacts again with another group. There's another group from Alcyone. The pictures we've seen over the years and the information we've heard over the past 20 years have largely been centered around the group that was from Tegeta. About a month ago, I was in Florida giving a talk, and a man approached me and says, I'm the fellow that called you to arrange the talk. And I says, very nice to meet you. Thanks for having me down here. And he was kind of smiling. He says, I have a special gift for you. And I says, okay, what is it? He says, we get to talking. He says, I'm having contacts with the Pleiadians. It's been going on for a long period of time, and I want to talk to you now about going public with what's happening here. And I was listening, because quite often people will tell you they're having contact with someone. It usually doesn't lead to much of anything, right? So we begin to talk, and he says, 6 years ago, excuse me, let me back up a little bit. He said his contacts had been telepathic for over 15 years. He was aware of when Meyer's contacts started, and he was having contacts with another group from Alcyone. And the reason he was having those contacts was because he himself is a Pleiadian. That his spirit came into a human body when it was 10 years old, and his parents from the Pleiades for years had kept saying hi to him telepathically, and they'd been with him all this time. And about a year ago, they asked him if he would be interested now in helping them with the new stage of awareness that they want to start, and would he be interested in being a physical contactee now? And he said he wasn't too sure that he wanted to do that he'd watched over the years and seen what had happened to other contactees, how they had taken so much abuse from the press and different organizations around the world, he wasn't sure that he wanted to do that. Then he told me that 6 years ago, he says, when you were over in Switzerland, do you remember some telepathic visions? And I says, yes. He says, that was the group telling you to keep moving on, and after you had those visions, they told me they were sending them to you, and you would be the one that I would meet in 6 years. I said, really? Kind of scratched my head. And he says, yeah, look at this. And he opened up this large 3-ring binder, and he says, about 2 months ago, I agreed to go ahead with the physical contacts. They want to start them up again. And I went out to see some of the ships, and I finally met my parents, and they took me aboard the craft. And he started showing me these beautiful pictures, some of which I'm going to show you here in just a few minutes. And as it turned out, 2 months ago, he did decide to have the contact. He does not want to come out in the public, at least right now. So he's asked me if I would be willing to show the pictures and tell his story, which we're certainly going to try to do. So it's just starting, apparently, again, in a different place with somebody else. And this is going to give us a chance to learn a little bit more, or I should say to get some more information, because I couldn't agree with Michael Hestman anymore. Anything we hear, we are told, we are definitely living at a time where we must learn to get truth for ourselves. We must learn to discern between the material body, which throws us off, and the spiritual side of ourselves that can tune into things and find the answers to anything. And actually, we're going to, because we went so late tonight, for those of you that are willing to stay, I'm going to show you about 7 minutes now of the new shots that are coming off the East Coast. The man lives here in the United States. Some of the first pictures that we're going to see. And for those of you that, if you can stay up late enough, since we did promise you a slideshow, We'll take a little break, and then I have about 100 slides of the Meyer photos. Any of you want to stay and look at those, I'll let you see all of those also. So let me get the camera ready. Is it about ready to go? Let's get the lights down up here so you can see them, and I'll show you what's happened. That's me. Throw a switch or something, guys. That's not the camera. That's still me. Yeah, okay. I hope they don't rewind or whatever you do, or you'll see my backyard barbecue or something on the camera there. This young fellow, what happened was his first contacts were strictly for photo sessions. And they told him to go buy a camera. And what he did, he bought a little inexpensive Polaroid camera, and he was led out to a particular site, and he snapped his first 2 or 3 shots, which hopefully we'll see here in a minute. Coming up. You've got it in there. The rest of us would like to see it. Okay. Do I? I could fall down or something. Are we cooking here? We have a camera sync problem. Should we just go plug it into the video deck in the back or what? Well, hopefully they'll work it out here in a second. This man has some interesting comments. He says the group that he's having contact with are Pleiadians. They're from Alcyone. They are from 925 years in our future, he says. They are also, and have been for several hundred years, cooperating with the Taygete group. You like that one, huh? The boys in the back room, I think, are you watching my home films or something like that? Nice barbecue. Okay, yeah, okay. See, and I told these guys, can we check this tape, before we do this, just to make sure it's going to work? Oh, no problem, no problem. We are professionals. No offense, guys. Don't burn the tape. His first meetings were a couple of photo sessions where he took some pictures of the craft. Okay. Well, we've missed about 4 or 5 of them here, but we can start here. You can back up a little bit if you can find rewind. I'll say stop when it's stop time. Okay, keep going. Keep going back. This is one of the little telemeters that Meyer was taking pictures of. Okay, one more back and then we can stop it. That's good, right in there, and let it go. See this craft here? That's that line, I think, is just on the screen or something there. This is, he says, a very large spacer craft, which his parents were on. It's a very large one, about 1,000 feet across, and unfortunately his camera did not have a telephoto lens, so it's kind of a long ways away. They let him have a couple of photo shoots, and then they asked him to contact me and kind of feel his way into the idea of doing this. He's had the contacts for about 15 years. They've all been telepathic, and frankly, they haven't been really for any particular reason. He was not expected to be a contactee early in life like Billy was. Now here we can see the telemeter craft. Telemeters are the unmanned remote ships that we also saw that in the Meyer case, where they actually collect information. They listen to our thoughts and languages and so forth, and trying to learn to understand us. I asked him how he wanted to continue with this, and as he was unfolding the pages, here's one shot from inside of a craft. He's up in one, and here you can see the old standard beam ship type ship. And up here is that spacer craft again. He proceeded to flip through all the pages and show me about 50 pictures. You're going to love them when we get them all together. What you're looking at here are just photocopies. I asked him to put some of them on a copy machine and mail them to us here real fast at the conference so you could see them. He's already been back to the home planets. He spent 2 days there. I've seen the pictures. You're going to see craft flying into their home world, their continents, their homes, the way they live. Apparently they plan on stepping things up a little bit, and for those that are ready, they're going to push it just a little bit farther. So hopefully things are going to work out quite a bit. Now, I must caution you, we don't know a whole lot about this yet. We're beginning to find out more and more about Pleiadians and other races and what they're doing. And as all of us are starting to comment to you, keep your mind open. This shot here is blurred just a little bit. He's in another craft, and it didn't come out very sharp. Also, they're much sharper when you see them small here. We're getting him a camcorder next week, so hopefully we can get some camcorder stuff here. They just started 2 months ago. I think he's had about 4 photo sessions so far. The latest ones were last Thursday, which you'll see here in a second, on Thanksgiving, was his last contact, and he called me on Sunday. Now up here, you can see the craft lined up. He says what happens, they were fading. Just as he snapped a shot, they were all going invisible, how they convert the ships so we can't see them. And just as he took the picture, they were just starting to blink out. So the first one over here is just almost gone. And he says one by one, they just kind of blinked out like light bulbs going off in order or something. Well, he's asked me not to say where he lives. I'll just tell you he lives in Florida. And these are over a major city. Just like in the Meyer case, they're telling us that they can control who sees these and who doesn't. By the way, his wife is very open, too. She's taken most of these pictures. Quite a few of his new pictures, like this one, he's in the foreground. This is of the patio of their apartment in that same lineup you're seeing over there. There's some ships lined up. I've seen the other pictures here. There's actually 9 of them came in V formation. You're going to see them just a little closer here in a second. These shots are about, these were taken just about a month ago. And you'll see them a little clearer here in a second. That's kind of the classic Variation 3 Pleiadian beam ship. Yeah, they were visible to the eye, and they allowed his wife to see them. Now here's kind of the classic Variation 3. And it's something, this one is slightly different, and this one over here is the bell-shaped craft. There are other groups of pictures. If you saw all of them, there was actually 9 of them in this formation. We're going to try to get them all together maybe and get them on a tape or something. You can all see them after the first of the year. There were several variations of craft in the pictures, including this unusual kind of bell-shaped ship over here. So far, just him and his wife and 2 friends of his. So it's just kind of starting up. Well, I think one of the intentions they seem to have is to try to clear up a lot of information. I was told that over the past few years, the way information will go, that they feel that maybe about 20% of the things that we've learned about Pleiadians aren't exactly correct. And I've already been asked on Sunday if I would come back to Florida, and if I was there, if I had a contact, what would I want to ask? And that was the first thing I asked. Could we validate so far what we've heard and what we've learned? This was on Thanksgiving Day. Him and his wife went out here, and this was his parents, he said, in the craft. He took a couple of shots that day. The other one, he's standing in the foreground, and he didn't want me to show that one because right now he's pretty touchy about anybody seeing who he is. He's very shy, and he's not too sure what he's getting into here. It looks like what's going to happen is that he says he is a Pleiadian, and because of that, they're very comfortable with him. The opportunity may be here now to funnel questions through him, and get answers to things and so forth. Now here's the kind of the classic ship. Well, we understand this one, at least in the Meyer case, we were told that this model had time travel capabilities to move interdimensionally. And it's the first time, I don't know if Wendell's had other people come up with pictures, but I haven't seen anybody else take these, since Meyer has. So it's pretty exciting to me as I'm sitting there in the hotel lobby and he's flipping through these. So. Okay, we can stop there. It'll go black here in just a second. Well, the crystals were on the other one, the new one, the wedding cake, the one that Meyer took, so we don't really know much of anything about that. But what we've got is the situation now. Looks like things are going to start again. He's telling me that they had a several-stage agenda that they want to do over the next 100 years or so. and that the Meyer case was part of that stage, and now they want to take it to a little bit farther down the road. I almost believe they're maybe be doing it with several other people too, but they seem to be quite comfortable with him, so I think we can expect things that are probably going to step up a little bit, as well as we may get an opportunity now to validate many things in the past. So someone else is having other contacts, and the man who in Florida who's having them says, when you show people pictures tonight, tell them that the Pleiadians love you and they're still here. All right, I think we're running okay. Let me just see how the slide projector ready to go? Okay, great. All right. We can get the lights down a little bit. I know it's getting late, so if I hear yawning or snoring, it's okay with me. Many of the pictures here, some of you may have seen, and some of them may be new to you, but I know it's always exciting to watch the Meyer photos. The main reason why is that when they started the Meyer contacts, the first few contacts, the purpose for them was photo sessions, literally. Even though Semjase, his Pleiadian contactee, had spent years listening to his thoughts, studying his language, and preparing for it, they were concerned, how far they could really take things, and it was decided just to take the contacts kind of one day at a time, so to speak. As Wendell has told you, what isn't commonly known, that Billy's contacts had actually started, at childhood, and he had them throughout all of his life. He's 57 now, and he's still having telepathic contacts, and I understand the new group from Alcyone that he's also had contact with them. As to what role he may be playing in the future, I really don't know. So this is his home in Schmid-Rudy that everybody has so much trouble finding. There's a sign out in front, and it says on there, the Semjase Silver Star Center. And he, of course, named that after Semjase, the Pleiadian woman that he had most of his contacts with. When you go over there, and by the way, when you stay at the Freihof down the road, this is the kitchen at the Freihof. Now, I don't speak any German. While I was over there, I learned enough to find the train station and eventually got something to eat. But I had to wind up going down to the kitchen every day and kind of pointing at the food and to see, so I could get something to eat. They eventually kind of caught on and started leaving things out that I liked. This is the garden at Billy's house. Typically, when people go over, you should write a letter first and let them know that you're coming. And maybe if you have a chance, state what your interest is, if there's something in particular that you want to know, whatever. And try to go in the summertime. It rains real good in the spring, and you don't want to be there. And it's way too cold in the winter. I went once in the wintertime. In '89, I went there in January. Big mistake. You just don't want to be there. I've never been so cold from that. But this is the garden, and most people, they'll invite you to work in it. And there are some unusual things around the place. There is a peach tree right in front of the house, for instance, planted from seeds from the Pleiades. And if you're there and you, from visitor's patio, whatever, just kind of walk by the front door of the house and grab yourself a peach and see if it tastes any different to you. Wendell mentioned that early on that Billy had spent a lot of time in India at the Ashoka Ashram, and he did in Maruli. And out of those 300 pictures that he had taken, some of them, fortunately, he had mailed back to friends, and here's a couple of them. His teacher during those years was a lady named Ascot. And Ascot was from what's called the Tao universe, from a race of people called Timmers. And this is her craft. They're a highly advanced race of beings, far more advanced than the Pleiadians. Actually, you might think of them as kind of the Pleiadian teachers, technically. Most of the technology for the Pleiadian craft has come from this race of people called Timmers. This Tao universe they're talking about is another physical universe. It is not our universe. They are actually from another universe, came into ours several thousand years ago on an exploratory thing, discovered the Pleiadian spiritual chain here on Earth and traced it to the Pleiades and became friends with them. You know, when you go to the doctor, they can take a little blood from your body and they can read a lot of things about your body. The Pleiadians and Timmers and these other races can actually sample your spiritual energy and read things about you. They can tell your number of lifetimes, how old you are as a spirit form, your family tree spiritually, how long you've been on a planet or off a planet. They can read a lot of things about you, so they're able to trace things. These pictures you're looking at taken in India a long time ago are of the Timmer ship from the Tao universe. What was remarkable about this time period in Billy's life was that since these were his educational years, They decided that if he was going to be a prophet, a writer, a contactee, and be responsible for getting a lot of information out into the world, that it would be a good idea if his information was firsthand as much as possible. So by benefit of the technology of this craft and this lady Ascot, Billy actually went on several time travel epics to watch our planet, primitive planet, come together. He's watched the dinosaurs. He's gone back and watched the pyramids being built. He's gone back to the time of Moses. He went back to the time of the crucifixion. They took him to several epochs in time so he would have firsthand knowledge and see for himself what was really going on. They were trying as much as possible to make things as accurate so we could depend upon the information as much as possible. This is the shot that Wendell was talking about with the little 8 clusters up there. It looks like there's actually quite a few ships. It's pretty hard to count them, but this is about all that's left of all those beautiful photos that we never got to see. There's about 12 of them over at Billy's house, and if you visit there, most of them are in the guest book. You can have a look at them. These next few pictures, you've probably seen some of them. These pictures are all of the Pleiadian beam ships. It was in January '75 that Billy's contacts actually started with this series, with this particular group. His life has kind of gone in a series of 11-year cycles as far as his contacts. He had contacts. His first one was when he was 5, telepathically. His first physical contact, I believe, was when he was 7 years old. His telepathic contacts continued until he was 16 with Spath, an old Pleiadian man who kind of raised him and led him through life. Then at 16, a new voice came into his head, and that was the years that he spent with Ascot. During those years, she's the one who led him out all over the world to learn and to study, discover all about himself. He eventually wound up in Greece, where he met a little lady named Poppy. They got married, and they went back to Switzerland, and they raised their children and started their family. He was then left alone for a 10-year period to kind of come together himself, mature, and make his own decision as to whether or not he wanted to continue with the contacts. There was never any pressure on him, really, to continue doing this. He could have stopped any time that he wanted to. The reason that he didn't is Meyer found out at an early age that he had been a contactee in previous lives with these Pleiadians. He even discovered that he apparently had kind of signed up spiritually, something like that, for several more contacts to go. He believes there will be 6 more incarnations where he will serve in a similar capacity. These discs you're looking at, the kind of the classic flying saucer, they call them beam ships. The reason is that they have 2 drive systems. One of them is a light-emitting system that converts matter into energy, then creates a gravitational wave, and then amplifies it to the point that it can literally propel itself through the universe. But this is only in a 3-dimensional state. It also has another kind of drive system which really isn't propulsion at all. The ship is actually capable of converting itself into fine matter, non-physical form, change dimensions, and move the vast distances of space in a non-material form. In 1975, when his contact started, he went out to the contact site, took his camera, the little camera that Wendell was telling you about, that all these shots are taken with. It's amazing, this little junk camera that he's got. He went out and shot these pictures. We don't have the ones from the first contacts, I understand, and I'm not sure exactly when this one was taken. But that day he met this lady from the Pleiades. She said her name was Semyasi. She had just spent 7 hours coming from the Pleiades, and she regarded that as an awful long time to be in one of these little craft. By the way, that's around 500 light years away. Not bad for 7 hours, huh? Gee. I'm going to do that. I have some drawings of the galaxy with some diagrams, Robert, and I'll give them a little idea what that's like. Good suggestion. We've never worked together before, Robert and I. So. The beam ships that you were looking at, by the way, they're 21 feet in diameter. They carry a crew of 3 people. They're capable, actually, of what's called interdimensional travel. If we have time and you can stay awake long enough, at the end I've got some drawings of how a universe is made and how it's divided into dimensions, and we could get into that a little later if it doesn't get too late. But Semjase told Billy that to begin with that her name really wasn't Semjase. We've come to call her that because that's the way Billy wrote it down phonetically. They don't have family names like we do. Actually, she said that they use sounds. They are aware that in their spiritual self and within everybody's spiritual self, there's a language of key or language of sign. And that if you use a sound or symbol to depict yourself, it can reflect your level of evolution and the path of discovery you're on during this material life. She called herself by the sound Semjase because in their language, that means a woman with half the knowledge of life. So Billy wrote it down phonetically, and we've come over the years to call her Semjase. She told him that one of their main interests was that here on Earth, they were able to tell by examining the spirit forms of all of us that most of us here, quite a few of us here, were actually related to them. That long ago, they think about 22 million years back for the first time, there was a race of people from a constellation called Lyra that came here to Earth. And Lyra, they believe, is the oldest known form of the white human form that they've been able to find. They say back then when those people came, there was a race of people already developing naturally here on Earth. That was the descendants of the brown skin race. When these Lyrians came here, they were very large people, very advanced. 22 million years ago, I'm sure the brown race was not very highly developed. When they came here, they found this brown skin race. They had absolutely no respect for them whatsoever, used them in experiments, genetic cloning, whatever they wanted to do with them, and was very disruptive to the natural order of things here on Earth. They've been able to trace historically over those past 22 million years that on several occasions groups from other places have come here. Most important to our history and our connection is this. That 230,000 years back, there was terrific wars going on in the Lyra constellation. Because of that, many of the people wanted to flee for their own safety and find a safer place to live. So they did. When they did that, most of them took off and landed in this area we now call the Pleiades. Some of them were in the Hyades, some of them went to Orion. Quite a few others went to many different places, but they're not of much consequence to us here on Earth. They're telling us that our link to them is this, that over these past several 100,000 years, there's been 5 occasions where beings have come from Lyra and actually colonized here on Earth. 2/3 of the white population on Earth is of the Lyrian genetic. People who have that genetic in them, they say, for the most part, have already lived on worlds and societies far more advanced than here on Earth, and will be rather uncomfortable here. Will probably feel more like wanting to live somewhere else, or will be very anxious to want to live in a more futuristic time when things are more spiritual. They actually chose the shape of that particular craft for the first photo sessions because that was the old Lyrian design, and it should be comfortable to all those people. If you are among that 2/3 of the race, they say, that has the Lyrian genetic in us, and if you've lived on other worlds, sometime in the past you may have owned one of those craft. At any rate, they probably are very comfortable to you, and they were concerned if they allowed photo proofs and they showed some of their other kinds of their crafts that we'd be a little afraid of it. It might seem very uncomfortable to us. After the Pleiadians and after the split off 230,000 years back, these beings that landed in the Pleiades was actually called the Azel system at that time. Azel had a daughter named Plesia, and when he passed away, she came into power and changed the name to the Plesia system. And from then on, they've always called themselves the Plesias. After a period of time, and this is how we come into play, they had their craft out in open space exploring. They were following a large comet. In the tail of the comet, they found some of the debris from the Lyrian planets that had exploded during the wars. They were following the comet, passed by our solar system, detected human life, and came into around the Earth and found human beings living here. We're greatly surprised to find that the people on Earth here at that time were Lyrians, some of their ancestors. So we have a family connection to these beings from the Pleiades. Our forefathers are also their forefathers. The people from Orion, there are some contacts from Orion. I don't know if anybody having contacts with the beings from Hyades, but it's all the same family. This makes them look at us kind of like little younger brothers and sisters. So they have kind of an affection for us in a way. One of the interesting things that's happened and why they're kind of stepping things up now is this. They say that our system, our solar system that we live in, goes around in a circle, a cycle. It takes 25,860 years to complete. Every time we get over here, right in this area where we are now, where we're coming out of Pisces and moving into what we call the Aquarian age, something pretty interesting happens. We are affected by a pulse, a wave of energy from the central sun that has an effect on all life forms on the planet. It affects the planet, the plant life, the animal life, and the people. This pulse energy accelerates things. It causes positive things to be more positive, negative things to be slightly more negative, but it accelerates everything. Our solar system, and in particular the planet Earth, was first affected by it 1937, 11:20 in the morning. This was exactly the time that they caused Billy Meyer and 3 other people to be born. Since that time, they've been very concerned as things are going to accelerate here on Earth, and so that draws their attention. If you think about it, right after that, we started World War II, so negative things were accelerated. They also know this is going to be a wonderful time of enlightenment, achievement, and inventions and other things, but everything gets accelerated. There is about an 800-year window of opportunity, they believe, for us to move from being such a material planet, become more of a spiritual planet, and find a more peaceful, spiritual way of living. If we do not within that 800-year time, they feel that we will probably fall more into the dark side, negative side of things, and as a civilization may pass just as many have before us. This is the reason that Meyer feels that his mission is for another 700-800 years during this entire time, this window of opportunity that they're talking about. Billy took a lot of pictures. I don't probably know any way that how you could ever count them, because probably about half the ones that he shot are in private collections. He would typically try to shoot 2, 3, 4 rolls of film every chance that he could out of the contact. And when he would do that, living out in Schmid-Rudy in the middle of nowhere, there's no film developer. There's not even a road sign there that tells you where you are. He would mail them into Zurich. And then typically the films would come back in a few days or a week, whenever it was. And after a period of time, some of the films started to disappear. What was happening, he found out, Semyasi told him, that it had drawn so much attention from governments, and as Wendell has told us, the CIA and different secret organizations around the world, that many of the photos started disappearing. I can tell you a little story on that, because I know where some of them are. I was once, I guess I'd say not entertained, but there was a knock on my front door a few years ago, and it was someone from Air Force Intelligence, and the man showed his credentials and wanted to come in and talk about the Meyer case, and I invited him in. And we got to talking, and it seems that he works on the crew for recovered discs. That's his job, and he's done that for a number of years, and he was very fascinated about the Meyer case and wanted to see the pictures and hear a lot about it. That he had not worked on the Meyer case, but had heard a lot about it and was fascinated by it. So I says, well, fine, there's a little information you guys probably have I'd like to hear about too. Why don't we swap some things here? And I says, come on in. I got slides if you've got answers, you know. So I spent about an afternoon showing him pictures and talking to him just like I'm talking to you. He wanted to know things also. And when we got through, and I says, now I want you to find out for me what's in the files, the Air Force files, the intelligence files about the Meyer case. And I'd like to find out if some of that other missing film is in there. He came back a couple of months later and told me that he looked in the file, and there was about a 10, 12-page summary in there that basically said the Meyer case is a complete hoax. There's no reason to put any other time in it, that the pictures are fakes, and the public is being a bunch of suckers. And there's a little code down at the bottom. And I says, were any of the pictures in there? And he says, nope. And I says, what's the code? And he says, well, that's the file they leave out, so when people break into files, they can pass it around, and it confuses everybody about what's going on. The code is where the real file is. And I says, well, get into that. Let's get into it. I says, are you kidding? That's an NSA file. You just don't get into that. And I says, come on. You wanted to, you wanted to trade information. Now get it for me. I didn't hear from the guy for about 6 months, and then one day he came to the door again. Says, okay, I got it. He came in and told me that he eventually got himself into the NSA computer files. If anybody here from the NSA, excuse me. He got into your files, and he looked in there, and there was a very large report which was quite the opposite. They were one of the people that were dogging him all the time. As Wendell mentioned, he was being followed. During many of Billy's contacts, he was followed by a little Cessna airplane. There was Volkswagens with antennas on it chasing him when he left the house. There was people hiding in the bushes. There was a large report in there. Basically, the summary of this long report was that Billy Meyer was no threat to the national security of the United States as long as he stayed home on the farm. And in there was a couple of hundred of his photos. So apparently they were some of the people in any way that were taking some of them out of the mail service. So hopefully someday we might see some more of them. The Pleiadians themselves, the ones that Meyer was having contact with, Semjase and her group, I should mention that his contacts Semjase was from the Tegeta section. There is a large underground facility in Switzerland that's been there, as I understand, for about 300 years, and there are a number of Pleiadian groups from different planet systems, solar systems, that use that base. Meyer's contacts were largely all with Semjase. She was the designated contact person to handle his case. He had very little contact at all with any of the other 300 or so people in the underground facility. The base commander, whose name was Quetzal, had some occasional contacts with him. But for the most part, the group that was there in the underground facility was concerning themselves with many other contacts that they would never tell Meyer about, and they were, of course, involved in, studying us and observing us and a lot of the other things they were doing. So there's, as we're finding out now over the 20 years or so, that the Pleiadians are many groups, many families. They have a lot of different interests. But Semjase was from the Tegeta section over here. That's about 500 or so light years. By the way, Alcyone over here, this is where this new group that we're hearing from is coming from. Now, as Robert mentioned, what in the heck is a light year? To give you an idea, we've got a little drawing here. With our technology so far, we have our rockets and we're going to the moon, and we can go maybe 30, 40,000 miles an hour, something like that. And when we get on our car and race to Las Vegas and speed, we go 55 miles an hour. I'm sure none of you break the speed laws. I think the van from the airport that brought me here never got under 100. It's hard to tell out on the open road, isn't it? But at any rate, this is a drawing here of our galaxy, the Milky Way. And it's an artist's representation of what it probably looks like based on astronomy and what we know of other galaxies that we can see. Out here it says sun's position. This is where we live. It is approximately 120-some thousand light years across our galaxy, the Pleiadians tell us. We are about 53,000 light years over here to the center of this galaxy here. If we were in a craft and could fly up on top, whoops, it locked up. I guess we just went into a black hole. I'm sure they'll have it back here in just a second. If we could fly up on top of our solar system, our galaxy, and look down, we'd see in a second here anyway that we're kind of out on the edge of it. Here we are. Thanks, guys. We live out here kind of in the suburbs. Now, it's 53,000 light years all the way to the center of our galaxy. The Pleiadians are only roughly 500 light years away, so they're just right here in the neighborhood. Now, let me give you a little idea what that is. See this little pointer I'm using here, this little light thing that shoots light out, little laser pointer? Now, they're pretty quick, aren't they? We can't really see light move. Light travels at 186,000 miles in 1 second. Now, let me give you an idea what that's like. If I take my little pointer, for instance, and walked outside and shot it straight, it would go around the Earth about 8 times in 1 second if it had the capacity to do that. Sunlight from the sun gets to us in about 8 minutes, starting to slow down pretty good. Get your calculators out now. If light travels at 186,000 miles in 1 second, well, that's only a second. Well, take 60 times that, and you got a light minute. Okay, whoops, 60 times that, and you got a light hour. 24 times that, and you got a light day. 365 times that, and you've got 1 light year. The Pleiadians are 500 light years away from us. The center of our galaxy is 53,000 light years away. So on the scale of things, light is pretty slow. To give you an idea, if we were sitting up here in the craft looking down at Earth right here, and somebody set a light off that was going to travel to the center of our galaxy, as we sat there and watched it in our entire lifetime, we would never see the light move. It's that slow on the scale of things. The universe is far larger, more complex, and bigger and older than we have any idea, they're telling us. Most of the craft that we've seen, and because they wanted things to seem pretty familiar to us, are the basic flying saucer type. Meyer did get a chance to spend a week on a very large, what we would call a mothership, one of the very large kind of floating cities. I don't have a picture of it with me, but this is what they're like. It's egg-shaped and has these 3 little kind of, they're not small, because this craft right here is 17 feet high, 17 miles high and 10 miles in diameter. So it's quite huge. There's over 140,000 people living on it. When Meyer flew into it, he took some pictures as they approached, and he says the garage is right down here. You fly in here, and you go up these tubes to the center part. The center part of the craft is hollow, and there are levels. As you float up through the center of this large craft, and you can get off at any level that you want to. There are rivers, lakes, cities, everything in there to simulate life on a normal planet. So they can feel quite comfortable floating out there in the space wherever they're going. Up on top up here is where they actually commandeer or run the craft. It's huge. It's several miles across. Billy said when he first went up there, they were explaining to him all about the craft, and they were kind of giving him the tour around the ship. And he noticed right away that there was no ceiling on top of the craft up there. As he looked up in the sky, he's looking at it, and they said, yeah, we like to, it's very pleasant. He was concerned that he was standing outside. And they would probably, he says, no, it's just invisible. We have the means to actually render things invisible to the eye. There really is a hard dome ceiling there, but it just kind of looks invisible to you. Not only, he says, we just like to see the stars as we're traveling around. As Billy was looking at it, he noticed that the stars blurred just a little bit and then stopped, suddenly went still. And he kind of noticed that and thought that was kind of peculiar. And he asked Semyasi what it was. And she said, well, this craft, this large ship we're in, just made a jump. It moved from one part of the galaxy to the other. And that's all we perceive when it happens. It doesn't do it in a material state. You can't accelerate the particles, physical particles, that fast. So we have other methods. We literally kind of take the ship, take it out of its material state, transform it into a non-material state, which we don't understand at all, move it to another dimension where there's no time. Once it's in that other dimension, it can then be, when it's outside of time, it can go wherever it's been programmed to go, re-enter, and no time has passed. The actual 7 hours of time it takes to get here from the Pleiades, over 3 hours is spent speeding up, leaving their solar system, getting out into open space. Then they transform the craft into this other fine matter state, convert it to another dimension, travel to 500 light years in just part of a second, nothing, literally. And then another 3 hours or so are spent traveling down into our solar system here. So 7 hours is actually kind of spent speeding up and slowing down. A good story about this mothership that I'll take just a couple of moments to tell you here. As Billy was watching the stars blur a little bit, he was kind of curious what was going on, and he kind of felt something strange inside of his body when it would happen. It happened a couple of more times. And he asked Semyasi, what's happening here when this is going on? I feel something kind of unusual in my body. And she says, well, think about this a second, try to figure it out. What's happening is the craft is converting itself from material form back into a non-material form. The craft itself is non-material, and your body is non-material. In effect, that means that you are not a material being there just for that part of a second. You are once again just the spirit form that you are when you are not in physical life. The same as when you're on the other side, or what we perceive of as heaven. Billy says, I get the idea. You mean I'm not in a material body there for a brief part, and then my spiritual senses then is what I'm picking up on. He says, that's right. You're a spiritual entity there just for a part of a second, and that's what you're feeling. Because when your material senses shut down, as in the death cycle, suddenly your spiritual self comes forward. Your spiritual self has the conscious and the subconscious. It's also able to sense things. It happened one more time, and Billy got real curious. He says, now I'm really feeling something now. What's going on? She says, well, actually, we've kind of planned this, and what we want you to do is we have an experiment for you to try. Once you're outside of your body, even though it's for a part second, then you are, as a spirit form, connected and are fully aware of what creation is when you are a spirit form, just like when you pass over to the other side when you're not having a physical life. Because normally it happens so fast that all you feel is a little tingle. That's why your body gets excited. He says, but we can hold the ship outside of the material realm for several minutes, and you can spend 7 minutes as a spirit form connected with creation, and you will know exactly what life is all about and what creation is then. No one will have to ever tell you again. Which is actually, they do it frequently with the children. They bring them up when they're young, and they can take them up into the ships and let them for 7 minutes sense creation, and they never again wonder what life is all about. Well, Billy says, I got to try this. He says, well, we thought you'd want to, so we've already arranged it. As a matter of fact, we're going to record it for you. Since you won't have a material body for 7 minutes, we're going to record the experience, your spiritual sensations, and when you come out of it, when you come back, you can go home and attempt to write it down if you can find the words. So they put Billy into this little chair that does the recording and says, stand by. It'll just be a few minutes and we're going to make the jump. And this time when we convert the ship back into its fine matter state, we're going to hold it there for 7 minutes. And for 7 minutes you will be a spirit form again without a material body, and you will feel your connection to creation. So they did. Billy was watching the sky. And again, the stars started to blur just a little bit. And then instead of staying white, he says they changed color instantly and went to gold. And then there was this huge bright light. He said instantly he was aware that it was even brighter than the sun. It was so intense. But then instantly he was aware that it didn't bother him. And he says, I don't even have any eyes. And he was suddenly aware he no longer had a body. And he tried to look around, and there wasn't any body. All he could see was light everywhere that he kind of looked. And his first sensation was that he was happy to find out that there is a spiritual consciousness. That once we leave the material body, we don't just drift off into nothingness with no awareness of who we are. There is the retention of the self, of the personality. Within a very brief second, he said he started sensing this unusual feeling flooding into him, and he was engulfed with this overwhelming feeling of love and compassion and concern, and he started feeling that there was other life forms all around him somehow. He says it's very difficult to describe this in real words, but within just a few seconds, you can sense what creation is. It is not a single entity. What we think of as the God force is not a supreme being. It's not an individual. It is an infinite number of spirit forms, much like ourself, who have evolved to a level of spiritual being where they are now literally creating universes. And what you sense in there is this infinite number of beings and their wisdom. And he says your connection to it then is wide open. You immediately know that you are a part of it. You immediately know that you came from it and are always connected to it. You are never separated from it. Most of the lessons that the Pleiadians are very slowly waking us up to is about this. How to slowly move from being a completely material being and interacting with the world at the material level and start interacting more with your spiritual self, which gives you the ability not only to perceive your connection to creation, but allows you to use your spiritual consciousness and your spiritual abilities to understand life and to find truth for yourself. That's ultimately how you're going to do it. You're not going to do it with your material body as much as you will with your spiritual self. For 7 minutes, they left Billy in this state connected to creation and then brought him back. When they came back, he could feel himself come back into his material body, and he was yelling, no, 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 I don't want to come back. Let me stay there. It's much better there. And Semyasi was shaking him and says, I know, Billy, we all feel the same, but no, that's why we don't do it very often. Nobody would want to come back. It's so nice over there. He says, but at least now you know. He says, oh, yes, it only takes a minute or so, and you know exactly what life is all about and what creation is. So hopefully, if any of you ever get a chance to go for a ride on one of those crafts, ask him for your 7 minutes with eternity. This is a little drawing of how hyperspace works, but I know it's getting a little late, so I think I'll kind of skip by this part, but it's okay? All right. All right. Well, let's say, for instance, that we want to travel from the Earth, and we want to go over to Ira in the Pleiades. The home planet in Tegeta, by the way, is called Ira, E-R-R-A. They live in a system very similar to ours. It has 9 planets. They say we have 11. We have 2 more to discover, 2 small ones out there. They inhabit 4 of those planets. They live mainly on 1 and use the other 3 for mining, manufacturing, things like that. But Ira is the home planet. By the way, they maintain their population there at about 400 million people, so that the population of the planet and the spiritual energy of the people that are alive is in harmony with the other energy forms on the planet, which means the mineral kingdom, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and so forth. They've learned to live in harmony with the spirit forms of those different kinds of life forms. Well, let's say we wanted to travel there, and we were going to hop in a ship here on Earth, and for the price of admission today, surprise everybody, we're all going to travel to the Pleiades. Please step outside and come into the craft. We'd hop into the ship. The first thing we find out, because we're going to want to know how do you fly this thing, but we don't have to know how to fly it. The Pleiadians themselves, for the most part, don't even understand how these craft works. They're not real handy people. They don't have to be. They live in a highly advanced race where most things are done for them with artificial intelligences that they have created. Most of the people on their planet are not technical oriented, like they wouldn't repair a lawnmower or something like that. They don't do things like that. They have developed the concept of what a computer is far beyond our imagination, to the point where they now create organic material with consciousness. In effect, what it means is the ship, to some degree, has consciousness and can think. So all we have to do is tell it, ship, we'd like to go to Era, and it will take care of the rest. We won't even feel the darn thing moving. The only reason we'll know that we're off and going is somebody will look out a window, or we'll look on the sight screens inside, and we'll see Earth rapidly disappearing in the background. We will accelerate past the planets, move out into open space, and we'll ask the ship, what's going to happen next? And it will tell us that, well, it has to move about 90 million miles outside of our solar system, the last planet in our solar system, before they're going to convert the ship to another dimension to make the long jump over to the Pleiades. They found out that when they make these jumps, it puts a little rip or tear in the time fabric. And sometimes by accident, if they do it too close to an orbiting body, it may pull that orbiting body out of its orbit or even suck something in behind it. So they don't do it. They get themselves well outside into open space before they do these jumps. So the ship will keep flying by all the planets. We can all look out the windows and grab some pictures of Mars and Jupiter and Saturn as we're speeding by. That'd be fun, won't it? We could even tell the craft, circle each planet as you go along, right? And kind of slow down to photo speed. So what'll happen is eventually we'll want to ask the craft how it's doing this, how it's flying and why we don't feel anything. And the ship will inform us that, well, in space, there actually is some mass to it. You know, when you drive along in a car and you put your hand out the window and you play with the air and you feel the resistance of the air when you were a kid, or maybe sometime this afternoon, okay? There's mass out there, isn't there? Well, there is also mass in space. There is something called the mass-speed correlation, where if you accelerate a particle in space, as it accelerates, the energy or the mass of space will try to implode it, literally crush it. In other words, you can't accelerate particles very fast. So we're saying to the ship, well, we're moving along here pretty fast, maybe around the speed of light. How come we're not being crushed? The ship will tell us that they protect the ships with an energy field around the craft. It protects us from this mass-speed correlation. If it didn't, we would have already gone crazy, because as we accelerate, the mass of our bodies would also increase, and pretty soon, after only going about 100 million miles an hour, our bodies couldn't take it. Our electrical body would give up, and we would literally go insane. It would fry us. That'll be one of the big difficulties that our astronauts are going to have as we learn to accelerate, unless we can completely bypass the rocket stage, which I'm sure we probably will. Even in the craft, as we come up with this craft and learn to propel ourselves, we're going to have to learn to protect our bodies from this mass-speed correlation, and we're going to lose a few astronauts. The ship then will tell us that what's going to happen as we get out into open space, the reality as we think of it is nothing more than a flow of particles oscillating at certain speeds. That there exists within the reality of the universe, it is divided into dimensions. Dimensions are areas where particles exist at different speeds, and time works differently. In the three-dimensional reality that we are in, the flow of particles that we exist in is controlled by this wave of energy called time. It stabilizes the oscillation of particles at subatomic levels so that there is the illusion of reality by our eyes. You all know that reality really isn't solid, it's just how we perceive it. Well, what the craft's going to do as it gets up to around the speed of light, it's going to turn off the force field that's been protecting us from all this energy that we're racing through. And they do this on purpose. They use the energy that's pushing in on the craft to facilitate the transformation of the craft into the fine matter state. This way they don't have to use big engines like on the large ships. They can use the pressure that's squeezing in on the craft. Instantly the craft is dematerialized. Just as it is dematerialized, the conversion into what our scientists call hyperspace happens. In effect, the ship in its fine matter state, which think of that as concentrated thought, is taken out of our three-dimensional reality and put into another dimension. In that other dimension, we are not solid, neither is the craft. When it's in that other dimension, they say, and this is one of the hardest technologies we'll figure out, you have to pre-program the fine matter, the particles we've become at that stage, to where it's going to go. If while we were in hyperspace up here, the particles that we are now made up of If the flow of the particles that we are now made up of changes, we will drift in time. If we slow our particles down, we will fall back into the past. If we speed the particles up, we move forward into the future. The exact formula I don't know, but that's the theory of how it works. One of the problems is that a single second in the timeless is equal to millions of years in reality. If our technology is not too good and the thing just slips a couple of seconds, when we come back to Earth, it might have gone back 10, 20 million years. If it slipped forward just a little bit, we may come back and the planet is already gone by that time. They're telling us that time travel is really quite complicated at this level. That here on Earth there are quite a few time travelers that have come here and got stuck. We may be running into a few of those. Our ship then will speed up, it will dematerialize, it will go into hyperspace, the ship will pre-program it to move the 500 light years to the Pleiades. It will then reform itself back into a material state and we will feel nothing. Billy says sometimes you can feel just a little bit of ripple in your body as your body comes back together. But most of the time you don't feel anything, that it's so fast. The ship then will be converted back into the solid form and we will fly for 3.5 hours all the way down into the planet Era. So that's our 7-hour trip. Incidentally, when we land there in Era, and we're all excited to get out and look the place over, we're going to have a bit of a problem. On their world, they are very careful about the protection of the spiritual realm of their planet. Because they're so evolved spiritually, they now understand that there are bands of energy around the planet that are there to protect the spirit forms of the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the mineral kingdom, the people kingdom. There are also Akashic record bands around the planet. There are many very sensitive bands of energy around the planet. They have learned to spiritually keep themselves in tune with these different levels. In effect, they're living in harmony with the different levels of life forms that exist. Because of that, each of the people on the planet Era lend some of their spiritual energy all the time to a band of energy around the planet that keeps all of this in tune and keeps it in harmony. They even have a spiritual council that kind of monitors that. And when you and I and all of us jump off the ship with our cameras blinking and very anxious to see everything, we're going to be approached by one of these spiritual beings and asked probably to come into a side room somewhere, and they're going to explain that much of our thinking, just maybe some of it, hidden down inside of our psyche, some of this anger and hate and things that we carry around inside of us, affects this band of energy. And they're very concerned about that. So our stay on the planet Era probably would not be too long. They might let us move around for a while and see things. Or most of us, I'm sure, are probably reasonably clear, and we'd probably be so happy to be there, it wouldn't really be a big problem. Meyer himself spent 2 days there one time and had no problem. But if any of us here, if we'd slipped somebody aboard that was too afraid or full of hate or anger or whatever, that person would probably have to wait on the craft and probably wouldn't be allowed to tour the planet. They're very protective of that. Oops, locked up again. Their atmosphere, their sky is basically green. The mixture of it is almost identical to ours. The planet Era is about 5% smaller than the planet Earth, something like that. And the readout, the stats on the planet are not so different than Earth. Actually, this is one of the reasons thousands of years ago when their ancestors discovered Earth, they felt like bringing some people here and having colonies here. It was very comfortable for them. On Era, we would find that nature is in far more abundance than it is here. When they travel from world to world, they find species that are becoming extinct. They bring their spirit forms back to the planet Era, and they bring them back into material life. They're trying to protect as many species as possible. Billy told me that when he was there, he actually even went into a large building where they collect cars and vehicles from different planets. It's kind of like a museum. And there were a lot of different cars from Earth and other kinds of vehicles they had picked up on other worlds. So just kind of a personal hobby for this individual. This shot's called the log shot, and years ago, I forgot the exact year, somewhere around 1980, this is the cover of the first photojournal book that came out that was published by Genesis. And it's a pretty good shot. Well, I know Billy was offered the opportunity on several occasions if he wanted to move himself and family to Era, but he turned it down. As to whether or not there are some of us living on here, I don't know. I know there are some of us living on the moon, that there is colonizations there, both Earth-based and ET-based, and I don't know about on here. It's quite possible, I suppose. I mean, they've been coming here for thousands of years. They've had contacts with a lot of different people, and I think it's quite logical to think that probably somebody is. All I really understand is that most of the ETs have bases there of one kind or the other, and I'm told, actually through this latest contacts that were coming through from Alcyone, that they keep a base there, and that there is a colony out there with over 200,000 people from Earth on it, living underground on the backside of the moon, and it's not run by them. It is a group of people from Earth living up there. That was about all they commented so far. Here we've got the craft spinning around the tree. Billy's starting to be pressed as the contacts went on to like put the tree by a fence, over a lake, by a tree, or any known object so they could kind of get a sense of the size of it. Apparently my slides don't like their machine. This is a really remarkable series of shots. I think all in all there was about 3 or 4 rolls of film shot. He had them literally posing by the tree here for quite a period of time while he moved from one vantage point to the other shooting the shots, and you can get a real clear picture that way of the ship. The tree story, huh? Well, the tree was damaged towards the end of the photo shoot, and Meyer actually had drugged the top of the tree back to the farmhouse, and he was very excited always to show the people at the farmhouse any evidence that he might have that the contacts were really happening, because there were quite a few people living with him at the time. That when this was happening to them, most of the people at the farmhouse, they were having quite a lot of difficulty understanding that this could really be happening. The information that he was learning about philosophy and science and life was quite overwhelming to some of the people there. So he was having quite a battle all the time, even trying to convince the people that he was living with that this was really happening. So whenever the opportunity came up that he could share something, a visual sighting, a landing track, anything, that he was up for it. So he drugged the top of the tree back down to the farmhouse where everybody could see it. And they all came out and they could see this burnt tree limb from the tree. And he was telling them how that the ship had accidentally, burnt the tree up. So he says, well, tomorrow, come on, everybody will go out and have a look at the tree. So the next day, several of them marched out to this location where this tree is, and the tree wasn't there. And Billy was a little embarrassed, thought he kind of goofed up or something, and this really fed the skeptics around the house that, that he was doing something or faking this somehow, so he was pretty shook up about it. The tree just wasn't there. His next contact, he asked Semyasi what happened. And she said, well, we were very concerned that we damaged the tree, so we changed the tree's time where it did not exist on a pulse wave where it could get hurt. They literally went back to the time point when the tree was seated and moved it a few pulses so it grew slightly out of phase and it couldn't have got hurt. But we still have the pictures, and of course the people in the house still don't believe it. They're still arguing about it. Didn't convince them a bit, but we still have proof that there was a tree there. We're seeing there's some landing tracks. Not often did the craft set down on the ground, and we're seeing the crop circles over these many years, and we're seeing kind of an identical situation here. This is Billy minus his left arm, and here on the ground you can see where the grass is swirling around here. When the ship lands on the ground, at least the beam ships, it has tripod legs. The energy of the craft is so powerful it overcomes the natural gravity of Earth, and you can see these landing tracks here on the ground. Actually, I think it was even about 6 months later, you can see here what it still looked like. Insects, apparently by the thousands, were attracted to the area, and I understand there was even some traces of gamma radiation on the ground here. But the grass was not broken, continued to grow, and after a period of time, and eventually the natural gravity of Earth overcame it, and it once again started growing like natural grass. We have the very same kind of similar situation happening in crop circles. It's just that we don't have the advantage to let them grow for 9 months back to the natural state so we can watch things happen. But at least we do have a display here that it's quite possible that this kind of energy can cause this effect. These are landing tracks from Lyrian craft. I mentioned earlier that the Pleiadian ancestors were Lyrians, and many of us are descendants of them. The Lyrians apparently over the past several thousands of years have had some very violent wars, destructed most of their planets, and really lost their power base. But fortunately, they've become more spiritually advanced now, and they're no longer fighting among themselves. And occasionally they would come and visit Billy, kind of like a social call. What you're looking at here is the landing track left by a Lyrian craft. As you can see, it's quite different than a Pleiadian beam ship. It doesn't have the tripod legs. Instead, it appears to almost set right down on the ground, kind of float on a bed of light. And when it leaves the ground all charred, looking something like charcoal here. This is Billy right in front of his house, where one of them set down the night before. And here's a view from the top of the meditation chamber. You can see it down on the ground there, where the ship was setting. And that's Billy's home there in Schmidrudi, where he lives. Actually, the house has been modified now, and there's that, on the front out here, they've built it all out, and there's a little porch with an aviary there where Billy spends most of his time. Yeah, actually they did. Nobody had any film on their camera, I'm told. It happened late at night sometime, and quite a few of the people filed outside and saw the ship, but nobody had any film, and Billy had to go get some film in the morning to take pictures of the landing track before the snow covered them up again. So unfortunately, we don't have any pictures of the actual ship. All we got is the hole in the ground. This is one of the metal samples that Wendell was remarking that he gave to Marcel Vogel. There was quite an extensive study done on that, and actually, if any of you are interested in following up on that, there's a really good tape called The Metal, which is about an hour under the electron microscope examination of the metal. It basically shows that this material is an alloy. There's a lot of thulium, silver, and crystal involved, and some other exotics, which we weren't too sure about. The most interesting was the manufacturing process that it appeared to be made in. It was obviously made in some sort of either cold fusion or vacuum system, which at that time Marcel Vogel had no idea how it could really have been done. I knew Marcel just not very well. I met him at a couple of conferences and didn't get to spend a lot of time with him, but I can assure you that after studying the metal, Marcel was very much into the Pleiadian case. Cal Korff was going around telling people that Marcel Vogel was a fraud and that it was solder and that he didn't know anything about this at all, which is not true at all. Marcel was a very brilliant man. He was a genius in his own right. And not only did he bring us the floppy disk and many other things, he had dedicated his life to solving the riddle of health in our bodies and was developing a process, a 13-sided crystal, by which that he could store the life force, a copy of your life force, when you're born. Then later in life, when you maybe got ill, that could be recalled from the crystal and your health could be restored. He had solved the problem of how to make the crystal, and he'd even figured out how to store the life force in it, but unfortunately he passed away before he solved the whole thing on how to get it out. So hopefully someone will continue his work. But I can assure you that Marcel Vogel knows the difference between solder and silver and other materials. And I think if you find watching the hour-long tape, you'll see that Marcel knows his stuff. I like this picture a lot. What happened to it? Well, there was, as I understand it, 4 samples. I don't know too much about the metal. You could ask Wendell on the side if you want, but I believe 4 samples were provided. They represented 4 of the 7 stages that they used to create the alloys. Marcel told me that the, one occasion anyway, that the 4th sample that he had that he was most excited about, he was in his office and got a call to go down the hall, put the sample in his right jacket pocket, walked down the hall to the other office where he was going, and when he got there, the sample was missing out of his pocket. He told me anyway that he was probably figured they probably took it back. Beyond that, he had really no explanation of what might have happened to it. This is a drawing of what Semjase looked like. She was about 5'4", really had kind of red blondish hair, was approximately 330 years old at the time that she was having the contacts with Billy. Now that sounds, doesn't she look good for her age? Taking those Pleiadian health pills, you know. Actually, they, most of their lifespan is because of the age of their spirit. Each time you have a material lifetime, you experience things, experience becomes wisdom, wisdom is energy, energy is fed to your spirit form. The longer you live, the more lifetimes you have, the more energy your spirit has to sustain the material lifetime. So if all other things are equal, each time you live a material life, very slowly you will start living longer and longer each time. So they benefit greatly from being a lot older than us as a spirit form. They still are material beings just like we are. They have their faults, their problems, they love, they hate, they have children, they get married, they do pretty much all the same things we do. They are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They openly admit they don't even understand us that well. They're trying to figure us out as much as we are figuring out them, and they make mistakes also. But we can also learn some things from them, and they can learn some things from us. They also benefit, of course, greatly of their technology. They have hardly any illnesses on their world any longer. Actually, they remark that almost all the illnesses they find here on Earth are by what they call irrational or illogical thinking. Either we think our body's sick because of the illogical way that we think, or in our irrational state we create diseases like cancer and AIDS and so forth and let them loose into our society, and they just can't understand why we do anything like that. She said, by the way, that we could probably greatly enhance our own lifespan here if people would just learn to use their spiritual energy more and control their bodies. You can literally, through your own spiritual balance, if you learn to meditate, you can learn to control each one of the cells in your body and literally keep disease from decaying the body as fast as it does. The Easterners understand this, and here in the West we're going to very slowly hopefully get away from soaking our bodies in chemicals and preservatives all the time, and we can learn that we can do this with our own minds. This is a picture of Ascot. I mentioned, and so did Wendell, that in Billy's younger years, from about 16 through 27, these were his real years of education for himself. And this is a picture taken of Ascot inside of a craft at a reunion he had several years later. He hadn't seen her for quite a while. Inside the ship, this poor little camera that he has, the film is usually always kind of this gray-green color. And as Wendell remarked, his camera's not in very good shape, jammed at about f14 short of infinity. And because of that, if you're into photography and all, that controls the depth of field. Anything about the first 10, 12 feet is a little blurry. So he didn't get a very good shot here. That was, he was on board a timber craft, and that was the only time he'd met this lady. And she was kind of Ascot's assistant or co-pilot or something like that. Don't know much about her. Well, actually, it was for Billy's own personal benefit. It was kind of a family thing, and Ascot didn't mind because she said that she had no plans to return to Earth, at least not anytime soon, and she didn't mind her image being taken. I think for a long time it was just something personal for Billy, and then eventually the picture came out. This is Billy with his long beard. Most of his life has been spent in the pursuit of the spiritual side of life. Because of that, he thought it might be interesting to grow the long beard to facilitate the material body in kind of like an antenna, which it does. And as you can see, he really got into the beard. This is a drawing of what Emmanuel, known to most of us as Jesus Christ, looked like around the time of the crucifixion. Wendell mentioned earlier the wonderful work that Dr. Deerdorf has done in researching all the information that came out of Billy's contacts with this information. And if any of you want to pursue that, I would suggest you get Dr. Deerdorf's book called Celestial Teachings, or the actual scrolls, the original writings from that time period by Emmanuel himself are now published in a little book called The Talmud of Emmanuel. And you can read that if you're interested in that, and you can find out a lot of things for it yourself. Just to give you a rough overview, this is what he looked like at the time of the crucifixion. He did not die on the cross. The Pleiadians say that he actually survived it. He went on to Damascus. He was there met by his mother and Judas and a couple of other friends. They continued their journey. He went into Afghanistan, went into Pakistan, where his mother passed away when he was 45 years old. She's buried in a small town called Mari, Pakistan, M-A-R-I. He eventually wound up in what's called the Kashmir Valley, the northern part of India. There's a little town there called Srinagar. He was married, lived there, had 3 children. He died there at the age of 115, and his body's buried outside of town on the side of a hill. But if you go there, there's actually certain people you can get in contact with and go out and see the burial site yourself.
So who protected his life?
Well, I wouldn't call it a lie. I think it's what we're looking at is after the crucifixion, he literally disappeared. They say that is true. And I think what we're looking at is if we go back 2,000 years, I think the people of the time really interpreted the best they could with what was going on. They didn't know what was happening. Manuel even told Billy that at his time that he was alive, he was so much more advanced than the people that he was talking with. He could spend a whole afternoon on a particular subject trying to educate them about something, come back the next day and they were totally confused. They didn't even get it. He was very frustrated because of that. His work was quite difficult. The Pleiadians tell us that the spirit of Emmanuel is actually not originally from the planet Earth. It's one of the 16 oldest spirits that ever came to Earth, far older than the rest of us, but he still is going through material lifetimes just like we are. I was told that he's had 5 material lifetimes since the lifetime as Jesus. Actually, there was 2 drawings, and you can see them in the Talmud. I forgot the lady's name. There was a drawing done by Simyasi of what he looked like, and then another lady in Switzerland, whose name escapes me, did another drawing, and that's what you're looking at here. Actually, the slide should be facing the other way is the way she originally drew it. Both of the drawings are in the book, The Talmud Emmanuel, so you can see the one that Simyasi drew, and the one, and this one here is also in there. Jesus lived in India by Holger Kernstein, a Christian historian in Germany. That's available. Well, it's hard to find it. It's been out a long time, and for those of you that are interested, you might go to a bookstore. It has nothing to do with the Pleiadian case. If you just want to read a very hardcore, non-biased study tracking down the life of Emmanuel after the time of the crucifixion, it's called Jesus Lived in India. The author is Holger Kernstein, K-E-R-S-T-E-I-N. They can usually get it for you. And it is a very detailed account of tracking down the life of this man. He followed clue after clue after clue for years in following the trail. And literally, in summary, it supports the very same thing that Billy and the Pleiadians are telling us. So if that's something that interests you, you could follow that book down. Here's this new Variation 3 craft again with the little pie crust edges, I call them. And this craft is a little more advanced than the older, the smooth type. It has the ability to actually move in time. The older ones, as I mentioned, can go interdimensionally. They can make the jumps long in space. Remember I told you once you're outside of our normal space, you have to control the speed of your particles or you'll slip in time. This ship has the ability to purposefully do that. It can leave our dimensional reality and then move itself up and down the time span and re-enter at different time periods. So it's quite advanced. This was one of the blow-ups that Wendell and Jim De La Tosa did during the time they were examining the film. It's not actually a real close-up picture. The computer did this and filled in all the pixels. So you can see how dramatically the technology that Wendell and De La Tosa came across was able to really clean these pictures up and see them very closely. Also, by doing this, they can do what are called thermograms. They can attach colors to temperatures of light and examine the light bouncing off the craft, then examine the light in the known area around it, like on the ground and on the trees, to determine whether or not it is the same reflected light. That way they can determine whether or not you're looking at a model or a paste up. And all of Billy's pictures passed in flying colors. There's never been any evidence at all of any kind of trickery with any of his pictures. Matter of fact, just the opposite. It is the only known UFO case in history so far that has over 1,200 pictures, daytime pictures, that have all passed the test. It'd be fun to have one of these, wouldn't it? You could just borrow one, and what would you guys do? You'd go visit Jurassic Park? That would be exciting. What would anybody else do? Anybody else got an idea? You'd go for the 7 minutes. Yeah, I think I would go for that one. That would be my first one, you know. Where's that button? Let me try that one first. You know. What?
Do the Big Bang.
Yeah, the crew over here, they want to go watch the Big Bang. So, yeah. Actually, the Pleiadians tell us there wasn't a Big Bang. There is more what the Eastern people call a sohar. There wasn't an explosion of matter, that the universe isn't what you think it is. It is more of a hologram, a three-dimensional field. It is an energy field that contains the reality that we live in. It's not quite what we think of it at all. There never was a Big Bang and explosion of matter. There was an area set aside where the creational energy that created the universe is established, And over a long period of time, the energy evolves into rings and so forth. It gets a little complex, but depending on how long we can stay awake, I've got a diagram of it at the end, and if you want, I'll go over that a little bit with you. That was the area that was most fascinating with me when I was over there. And in my book, The Pleiadian Mission, that just came out, most of it is devoted to all my conversations with Billy about the science and the spiritual things and so forth that I was learning over there, because that became my main interest. So if you want to follow that very closely, then in the book, I think I did a pretty good job of clearing that up. Here we've got Billy out playing with a gun. Wendell mentioned he liked to carry a big 44. He asked the Pleiadians if they carried guns or they ever had them, and they remarked no, that they didn't even remember a time when they ever carried guns or weapons. As a matter of fact, emotionally, I don't think they're the type of people that ever even handle one. From his description of these Pleiadian beings, they seem to be so emotionally balanced that I don't think that they could ever even bring themselves to fire a gun, probably even in defense. He says inside the craft, when you're around them, they are kind of like, they are so filled with unconditional love and this happiness and this emotional stability, you don't want to leave the ship. You spend a couple of hours with them, you feel just wonderful. But then you have to come back to our reality, spend a little time here, and then go back in the ship. And after you do that about once a week for a few months, he says you get a little cranky. It's pretty hard to keep jerking back and forth. So, by the way, when you're in the craft, their food, they just munch on little veggies. They don't eat very much. They don't eat prepared meals like we do. They don't sleep very much. That's one of the advantages of being able to control the material body with your spiritual self. They only sleep 2 or 3 hours a day. And that the difficulty is for us humans, here are Earth people, when you go aboard the craft, you're affected by the atmosphere in the craft, and it will change your metabolic rate. You won't get very hungry either, and you won't get very sleepy. But once you leave the craft and come back home, look out. There's kind of a slapback effect, and suddenly you're awfully hungry. You probably eat your shoes. And Billy would typically sleep for hours, whatever. Well, anyway, back to the gun. They didn't have a gun, so one of the Lyrian ladies brought him a gun to play with, and here's the gun. Frankly, if you blow it up, it looks kind of hokey. It's the handle looks like something from a spray gun or something like that, and the tip of it here looks like plastic or something. It doesn't look very much anything very serious, but it does put holes in things. This is the tree right in front of Billy's house. It's still there. The hole is still there after all these years. Billy says when you squeeze the trigger, there's no light, there's no sound, but it will put a hole in anything, he thinks, for probably about 20 miles. And in his private photo journal over there are several pages of pictures where he had a ball with this thing. He popped holes in everything all over the place. Beyond that, we don't know too much about the darn thing, and he had to give it back. So it's a good thing they did, or the CIA guys would have probably got their hands on it. They'd be slicing up everything. So here's a couple of pictures underneath the craft. There were some sound recordings made which were turned over to the investigative team, and there was some analysis done on it, but frankly it didn't reveal that whatever made the sound was from another planet. It just revealed that whatever made the sound would have had to have been very expensive, very complex equipment. And frankly, they couldn't figure out, how anybody could really make it. But at least it gave us an opportunity to get a couple of pretty good pictures underneath it. Here, Billy's starting to take pictures with tree limbs, barbed wire, anything in the foreground to use as proof, so the computer could then do the geometry, do the math, to find out how far away these objects are and how big they are. Here's a regular craft. These two smaller ones here are what are called telemeter ships. Telemeters was a phrase, I guess, given by Wendell, to refer to remote ships. There's nobody in them. These little craft, there are literally hundreds of them all over the planet. This is how they monitor our thought processes. They have openly admitted that they will broadcast visions and ideas to thousands of people. During the time of Myers contacts in the 70s, there was over 17,000 people receiving visions and thoughts of different types as we sleep and at different levels of our consciousness. Then they listen to what we do with them. To them, they feel this is one way that they can help us learn things and help us to raise our consciousness ourselves without really interfering with our own free will. So they're allowing us to kind of get some information and data, and then what we do with it is up to us. Fortunately for us, they're not forcing us. Then if they were too open, and gave us too much information, it would overwhelm us, and they would wind up literally taking over our society. Here we've got a tripod in the foreground. On this occasion, Billy was also taking movie film. And for those of you that are interested, there is a videotape called Beam Ship, the movie footage. There are 7 or 8 clips, I forgot how many on there, of the ships flying around. Little short 5-minute segments that Billy took of the ships flying. Here you've got a regular craft, and then you've got these little 2 telemeter ships here. Notice in the new pictures that the new fellow has also already taken pictures of the telemeter craft. They're all over the place. Here's a pretty similar shot. See how all over Switzerland you have these big hills and they fall off for thousands of feet? This is what Wendell was up against when he was over trying to test the pictures out. If you go over there yourself, you'll see there's no flat land in the area anywhere. It's all up and down. It would have been very, very difficult for anybody to go out and try to fake these pictures or, hang them with wires or float them, something like that. Now this one's pretty interesting. Look down here at the bottom. Here's a craft. Billy's inside the ship. He asked if he could go take a ride and see some of the other planets. 3 ships came. He's in one of them. They're just taking off from the ground. Here's one down here, and here's the other one up here. Here you can see it just a little better in this next shot. And here we're inside with the kind of the green-gray color. Well, they are antenna. The old beam ship has a little antenna, and it's literally an energy sensor. You know how in astrology we try to calculate the effects of different planets? They do something like that too, and this antenna is used to detect different kinds of energies. And on the older beam ship craft here, we see that quite frequently. It's not on the newer ships, but it's frankly just an antenna, just like any other antenna, to detect different kinds of energy fields. It even has, there's a ring around the old beam ship too that cleans the metal. They turn that on every now and then and the metal cleans itself. Yeah, that's probably where they got it. They went into one of our markets and got some oven cleaners and said, here's a good idea. Now this is Billy's farm in Schmidt-Rudy, and out here in the parking lot you can see where they park the cars. On the left here's the meditation building. Upstairs is the meditation room. Every Sunday we would get together in there and they have a ring. They get in and meditate. In the Pleiades, they have a mantra for Earth. And many of the people on the Pleiades would do this mantra, this meditative mantra at a specific time so it would correlate here on Earth so Billy's group could do it at the same time so they could join in the energy that was being created. Billy even fashioned a little copper pyramid which facilitates the energy flow from the human beings so it would have a better chance of connecting with their energy on the Pleiades. And on Sundays we would get together in the meditation room and do our mantra. And the mantra that they use is actually in Lyrian language. They still speak it. And it goes like this. Salome gamnan ben erdi gan nibur esala hesperona. That's a phrase that means peace in wisdom to the people of earth and all beings of creation. And they've been doing that for almost 20 years, almost every Sunday at 1 o'clock Swiss time. And they're still doing it. And any of you want to join in, you could figure out on your clock what time it is in Switzerland. It's usually 7 or 8 hours different. And you can do it at the same time and say that same phrase. Salome, Gamnan, Ben Erde, Gan Niber, Esala, Hesperona. And you will be speaking a very old language that the Lyrians spoke for hundreds of thousands of years, and that's the meaning that it has. Peace and wisdom to the people of earth and all beings of creation. I know, everyone wants me to write it down, right? I don't have a board to draw on or whatever, but I could write it down for you later on if you want. What we're looking at here is something very unique. We're seeing a lot of pictures of metal discs. Now we're beginning to see some things we're calling plasma ships and some very unusual objects. Back in the 70s during Meyer's contacts, not all of his contacts were with physical beings either. What you're looking at here is most unusual. Woke up the whole household one night. This time they had some film. Billy started taking some pictures of this unusual thing. He tried sending telepathic pulses to it the way he'd been taught by Semyasi. There was no reply. He tried to send out his feelings to see if he could detect any kind of emotional feeling or life from it. Felt nothing. The thing kept changing shape. It would get longer, it would get smaller. Small balls of light would fly off of it and zip around the farmyard in different ways. Here you can see it stretched out pretty good. What you're looking at is not a solid object. Semjase later told him that she believes, by the way, their instruments were not even able to detect this thing coming into the earth plane. It got by their instruments somehow, so it's quite advanced. She told him that she believed what had happened, that he had probably gotten pictures either of a race of people that exist without material form, something like what we might call a collective consciousness, and they felt it was probably connected to the Andromeda galaxy. So there's a race of beings that live on the edge of material life that they draw information and spiritual advice from for their own people. They were quite surprised that Meyer got the photos because they'd never heard of these beings really presenting themselves to other people like this.
Are those the Arcturians?
No, they're not Arcturians. Actually, we don't really have a name to give them. The Semjase just believed it was probably from the Andromeda Council, but we're not really positive about that. It didn't come back, and Billy didn't get any information from it. But what we do know, anyways, we're looking at some kind of life form that's highly developed. It either has the ability to send its presence or a probe of some kind to pretty much anywhere that it likes. See, it's pretty big here. It's stretched out in pretty good size. It's actually quite hard to tell how big that thing really is.
Did you recall a photograph of a female three-day flight from years ago?
Was it? No, I don't recall that one. Didn't know about that one. This was the light up in the sky. Eventually, it disappeared up into that light, and the sky went black, and that was the last they saw of it. Billy's contacts ended about October of '78, the series of contacts that were designed for the people of Earth. I call them the educational contacts. It was decided then to stop the ongoing physical series. After that, they would continue having occasional telepathic contacts, mostly for his own benefit. You heard earlier that he's had 270 or 280, something like that. At this point, there had been 115 contacts up to October of that year. The contacts after that were largely all just telepathic things that he would receive occasionally for his own benefit. They were not designed for us or for the people of Earth, so we really don't know anything about those contacts, and we don't know what they are like, what kind of information, and there's no information to support what they are or whether or not they've actually happened. What we do know is in 1981, he once again received that familiar cooling sensation. I don't know if the phone rang 10 times that time or not, but he was told that they were coming. They had a new kind of craft, and he was going to be allowed to take some pictures. This one is quite different than anything else we've seen. I told you earlier that the old types of craft is very comfortable, and it generally is. To most people, this one seems quite unusual. I should also mention that these pictures were taken after the time period that the films were being examined, and to my knowledge, I don't think any of these films have really been put to the test. But on the other hand, they're pretty obvious. He's almost right underneath it here. This is a matter displacement device. It actually does not have a propulsion system as we would think of it. They discovered that, as you know, you have an auric field around your body, don't you? We're finding that out. We're also finding out that the planet has its own field around it, many of them. Star systems have a field around them that they create, and a galaxy itself has an energy field that it creates that is made up of all the life forms inside of it. They discovered, actually, or they were told, that within that galactic field, there are kind of like canals or veins that where there is no time. And this craft, I call it a matter displacement device. Billy calls it the wedding cake. It has the ability to dematerialize itself, move into those veins or canals, whatever you want to call them. It can then reappear anywhere it wants to within the galaxy. It only works within the galaxy. And as far as we know, this was the first attempt at scaling down this kind of technology, which they had already worked out in their larger craft. And the smaller craft here was the first test ship, as far as we know, to try it out. As you can see, Billy's got them well trained to park the thing by a tree. Can you imagine in their handbook from the Pleiades, you know, one of them's going out, oh, I have to have a photo session, and I'm supposed to park the ship by the tree for the Earthman. Okay. It's getting serious, isn't it? Yeah, on the bottom, you'll see them a little better in a minute. They appear to be kind of like crystals, but I don't know that they really are. I can tell you that this van is 6 feet across and about 12 feet long, because I slept in it for months behind the house. That was my bedroom, so I have a pretty good idea of how big that is. Because I know I can lay right across it. I'm almost 6 foot, so it gives you some idea of the size of this thing. Now here's a UFO picture about as close as you can get it without getting run over. That's Billy's house in Schmidt-Rudy. There are some interesting things here. There's obviously a door right here. You can see that there's a line here, and it looks like there's probably an opening of some kind. This craft also doesn't have tripod legs. It has little bitty short legs, and it sits down almost right on the ground. The round balls? I don't know what they really are, and Billy didn't have any idea either. Yeah. All we know for sure, see the reflection in here? And there's been a lot of study on this. I know from where he's standing that behind him, from his camera vantage point, what you got in here is the reflection of the building behind him. It's reflecting on it. So I imagine you could probably go over there, and if you could get that same spot again, measure the building, measure the balls, measure this, you might be able to figure out the actual size of this thing. Personally, myself, and you can see here it's on the ground. Billy's not real tall. I think he's probably 5, 6, 7, somewhere right in there. And based on the fact how high the camera would be when he took the picture and being familiar with this general area, I can't see where this craft is over at the most 8 feet tall, if even quite that tall. With a little simple geometry, it can tell you that this craft is probably, in my estimation, maybe not more than 15, 16 feet wide. I don't know for sure, but it seems to me that it's a little smaller than the regular ones.
Where's the garage door?
The garage door opener? It could use one, couldn't it? No, this was a manned ship. In Billy's photo book over there, they actually spent the afternoon there. When the craft came in, it floated over a couple of the cars sitting out here in the parking lot, and it messed up the electronics in the cars. And that afternoon, they were kind of embarrassed. They tried to fix the electronics in the cars, but they couldn't. Billy had a little fun with them that they can travel the universe, but they can't repair a Volkswagen. They stayed there pretty much all afternoon. As you can see, it's nighttime when they left. Here it is in the evening, and the craft is floating out over the cars there in the lot. That green light up there is the floodlight from the parking lot out in front of the house there when they were leaving.
Did anybody else see the crash with the people in the car?
I don't think so. I think he told me anyway that he was by himself that day when this happened. That there was nobody else there at the center. I don't know. An elevator, huh? Well, it certainly is an unusual device. It would be interesting to find out now that there seem to be some new contacts started with this group from Alcel, and we might find out more about this craft. So far, we haven't seen any photo evidence that it exists, but perhaps in the near future we can find out from them if this was ever used again and if the technology developed into something, and then maybe we can get some validation as to about this craft in these pictures. This is what Robert's referring to as the crystals down here. I don't know if they're really crystals, but they do look like it. And over here is the little bitty small landing feet, and there's some sort of etching around the edge. It's pretty hard to understand.
It's possible that basically that's what they want to do. They could speed up now that the speed of light is not the speed of light, transfer to the crystals to the supposed plasma, you can't see, they're actually there.
Might be. This is the energy of the ship right here. That's Billy standing there. You have to look kind of close. There's his legs. There's his head, and there's his hand. He's underneath the craft trying to get a picture of it. Someone else snapped a picture of Billy, and when the film came back, this energy, because the ship's right up here out of the frame of the picture, and here what you see is the energy from the craft all around Billy, so it's doing something like that. Okay, here's the last one. Okay, we can slowly turn the lights up now. Watch your eyes as whoever's by the lights can bring them up. Whoa. Got me. What do you think slow about that? Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a long night. We didn't think that for this to run this long. but we didn't have the other thing going, so this is
Thank you.
Substitute, a quick plug-in to substitute for the discussion we had planned for the evening. Thank you very much, folks. See you tomorrow.
What?
You have a chart you could show.
Well, I do, but it's just getting so late. It probably takes me another hour to go through all the charts and the mind. And I tell you, it's in the book. I tell you what. I know it sounds like a sales pitch, but all of it's in the book if you're interested. And I do have a lot of copies there. So. Yeah, I've got them right here if you'd like a copy of the book. If they'll let me in the other room, there's a case of them sitting there. I guess if I can get into the exhibit room. I'll be here tomorrow till noon, and I'll be here all morning at the table if anybody's interested. And I've got the videotapes with me, and I've got a lot of copies of the book, and I'll be there all morning till about noon. If you're welcome to come by then. Probably a lot of similarity. Thanks very much, folks, and good night. Thanks for sticking with us, okay?